Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire, coming to you from the People's Reset, Derek Brose's People's Reset here in, I like to joke, narco territory, Morelia, Michoacan, and speaking with one of the speakers who I also had previously on my TNT radio program, Aaron Day. How's it going?
Well, I'm going well. It's going well. How are you?
You
Still waking up.
Me too. Yeah, got the coffee, and you're one of my top people on what I like to always bang on about on my podcast, the algorithm ghetto, right? The social credit system, the cyber gulag, the electronic concentration camp. You've got your Daylight Freedom Foundation, of course. You're a Brownstone Institute fellow. I'm a huge fan of Brownstone. I've interviewed many of their fellows, and I guess to start, you talk a lot about solutions, but I always like to, on the podcast, first look at the problem, and maybe just starting there. I know you've given, I think you said you've got like a 4-hour talk. Is that available online or?
No, I've actually done them primarily in person because there's a lot of practical hands-on learning how to do crypto, and that changes all the time. I'm eventually going to make it all online, but no.
Yeah, because sometimes some of us can't catch your live appearances, especially me being here in Mexico. So that'd be great at some point to get that longer crash course. And so, if you could sort of lay out for us the threat, this beast before us. I call it the algorithm ghetto. Some people call it the social credit system. What are we looking at here?
I mean, the threat that we're looking at is really it's technocracy, and it's the formation of a one world government that would essentially be backed by a single digital currency, and that digital currency would be backed by energy credits. And so this is essentially the big threat that we face. And the timetable for this is also well known and articulated. It's 2030. This is literally what Agenda 2030 is all about. But this whole idea of moving towards this type of technocracy started in the 1930s with the Technocracy Inc. movement. And so this idea of moving the economy from being a price-based system to an energy credit-based system is 90 years old. And so really the technology to make this all really possible has only come about in the last 10 or 15 years. And now we're near that endpoint.
Could you expand a bit? Because I heard you talk about it, and it wouldn't have the time for the question when you mention energy credit. So I've heard about that. How do you see them develop? What does that mean in practical terms? And what are some of the current, cryptos or developments that are related to the birth sort of this energy credit?
Think about it as carbon credits. Essentially that's what it's all about. So they're trying to create a system based on manufactured scarcity, which is what carbon credits are. And meanwhile, you look at BlackRock and all of these other large multinational organizations are going out and buying. They're buying timber, they're buying they're getting ahead of buying carbon credits, essentially, because they know that this is the way that we're moving towards in terms of a currency based on these energy credits. So they're actually jumping ahead on that. And to see this in tangible form, there is this offering called the Doconomy MasterCard, which was something that it was a pilot project from 2019 to 2022. In conjunction with the UN. So this is an actual MasterCard that has the United Nations Climate Action logo on it. And this is a card people voluntarily signed up for that would track your carbon credits. And when you hit a threshold, it would shut off access to your money. So what people need to be aware about it, this is not theoretical. This is not, when the Technocracy Inc. wrote about this in the 1930s, it was theoretical. Now it's tangible. MasterCard has been working on this for years. You can go to the MasterCard Green Partner site, and it lists over 150 companies. Most of these are WEF partner companies. And they've already started tying financial transactions to carbon. And you probably noticed if you buy an airline ticket now, it tells you CO2 emissions and whether or not the flight is green. So what's going on and what's been going on now for years is they've been putting these tracking systems in place related specifically to carbon. And that becomes the basis for the currency itself. So your ability to use currency in the future when we move towards this global digital currency backed by energy credits is if your social credit score, if you don't perform the way that they want you to, it will literally shut off your money, and your behaviors will actually be tied. Every behavior you do will be tied to its energy consumption in an energy credit-based system.
I've been trying to pull it up. I can't pull it up now, but so in what you just outlined, I don't think people are aware of how far down the line. This is because I've got different bank accounts, but one of them is with Bancomer or BBVA. And in the app, I can log in right now, and there's a sustainability tab. You click on it. I was trying to get my screen grabs of it. I can't find it, but I go to my bank account right now, and it says carbon footprint. So they're already tracking me. All customers of this bank, it's at the information stage right now. So it says it gives me my estimate of my carbon footprint. I use mostly cash, so they don't have as much. But it says like my carbon green sin is like 10,000 kilograms or something, and it's got categories for electricity use, energy use, gasoline use, airfare. I'm sure. And like I said, I don't. One thing that I stopped doing, I get my monthly electricity bill, and I would tend to pay it with my credit card because it was just convenient, on the phone or computer. But that goes into that footprint tracking. Yep. So what I decided to do was I'm not doing that anymore. I go to the convenience store with the bill and I pay in cash, and they charge a commission of like a little less than $1, and I'm willing to pay that extra commission to maintain my privacy. So this way the bank carbon tracker doesn't get my that information, and they actually tell you in the carbon tracker, upload your receipts for your gas so we can better track. And so it's already here, and I'm imagining that scenario. At some point, they're going to move to stage 2, where if I buy a plane ticket, $500 to go to the U.S. and back. Okay, and then maybe I want to buy a second plane ticket within the same year. It's going to be $500, but they'll probably say the carbon tax will be another $500, so it's going to turn into $1,000.
Yep.
And the wealthy will be able to continue just living a normal lifestyle. They'll be able to pay those taxes, but the middle class will be like, I can't go on any more flights, right? Is that sort of how you see it?
Yeah, I mean, Bill Gates will still be flying around in his jets and living in his 27 bedroom or bathroom, I don't know which one it was, mansion, even though he's now a bachelor. And that will go on, and yeah, it'll impact the average person disproportionately by design, because it's about control. It has nothing to do with saving the environment. It's completely about control. It's all manufactured scarcity.
How do you see them being able to onboard globally? I mean, not just in the U.S. Like I said, here in Mexico, these private banks in Mexico, Mexican agencies. I mean, this is across the board in every country. How are they? You mentioned MasterCard. They've got the banks. The businesses are coming on board. The universities. I mean, where I used to teach is the top private university here in Mexico, which is globalist. They've had Bill Gates speak at the online graduation ceremonies. Hillary Clinton, Al Gore came to our campus while I was still teaching, I think 2013. They paid him $200,000 to speak about climate change, and you couldn't ask him. All the questions were scripted in advance. And so, by what mechanism do you see them able to onboard so many people to this?
Well, the WEF, I mean, there are over 1,000 partner companies involved with the WEF. So if you look at the size and scale of the WEF, this is a real force for pushing this stuff out. For instance, the top 10 WEF partner companies alone have a combined market cap of, I think it's $9 trillion. They employ 6 million people, and they have $1.5 trillion cash on hand. That's just the top 10. So if, top 10 out of over 1,000. So these organizations working together to push this agenda can do a very effective and efficient job. And of course, all of the large banks are already a part of this. And they've been doing it willingly, right? I mean, again, a lot of this tracking, which is the hardest part to implement, has been going on for a long time. They've been building this stuff for over a decade, and nobody's really complained about it, right? It's just, oh, well, it's harmless. This just tells me my CO2 on this airline ticket. Nobody's thinking about it as part of a control system and part of a system to change how money works tied to social credit. That's not the way that they've been introducing it. And if you look at what they've been doing with indoctrination in public schools, I mean, the younger generations now are living in a constant state of anxiety because they bought the climate alarmism. They're sitting here saying, I don't want to have kids. I've been told basically that, I should have no self-worth because I'm carbon, and I'm actually contributing personally by existing to this existential threat. So they've done a great job getting people on board that are at a younger age.
Yeah, I always joke, make babies that'll make Cobra Commander Klaus and Bill angry. And yeah, I can give further examples. People have no idea. I'm relatively. I don't know if you know Legal Man. Lee Gallman of Jones Plantation. I've had him on the podcast. I was interviewing him years prior, and he says he's cyanide-pilled, and I've stolen that term. I'm pretty pessimistic though, because I can give you further examples here in Mexico. I live in Guadalajara. They ran already prototypes of a social credit currency. I forget what it was, where they made deals with local restaurants. And so if you cycled and jogged like a little hamster in the wheel, you would develop these social credit points, and then you could use those at the restaurants or fast food places that were on board. Or a few years back in Mexico, they forced everyone to activate geolocation on your phone or your laptop or computer to be able to access your bank. Like, these are the first phases, right? Vehicle emissions. We know in the U.S., since I was a teenager in the U.S., we had to go do vehicle emissions tests once a year, right?
Yep.
That I came to Mexico in 2010. Nothing like that existed until about 2 years ago. So 2 years ago, here in Mexico, they implemented the vehicle emissions. You got to go once a year. And they're hard on it. The transit police I call it green police. I actually saw a special green transit police just for giving tickets to people who didn't do their emissions. And I know some people in Mexico whose car didn't pass the test, so effectively their car is illegal, right? And so that's sort of all tied to this system. How cyanide-pilled are you? How far do you think they'll be able to sort of implement this system, and that would affect our daily lives and our daily function?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm cyanide-pilled, because I'm out trying to promote solutions. And I actually think that a pretty small resistance can actually dampen their plans significantly. So, but as to, I am cyanide-pilled regarding what their intentions are and how much energy and money and resources they are putting behind it. But to think about how absurd this is for a second, they want us all to worry about carbon, yet the same technocrats, you've got Sam Altman from OpenAI, you have Larry Ellison from Oracle, you have Elon Musk, you have Bill Gates. They're now talking about building all of these data centers all throughout the United States, to the point where President Trump is coming in and saying, well, we need to improve and increase our entire energy capacity just for AI. So those same technocrats that have been pushing this propaganda about carbon emissions are literally going like next level. They're going to be spending so much more on energy for these data centers just for AI than what you and I personally, our impact personally, or humans' impact relative to what they're doing with these AI data centers. And so it's going to be interesting to see if that might be an argument. Well, we need to cut down on our carbon consumption so that we can power these AI data centers. I could actually see that turning into one of the arguments.
Oh, they'll just buy more credits. What do you think? And all this AI stuff, it was talked about here at the conference. We can make good uses of AI, but what do you think their obsession with AI is? I see it as key to what we were discussing, to being able to quickly surveil and make calculations, for the algorithm ghetto. AI is key for that. I've also argued, I sometimes think, we all know the climate change narrative is false. I've had many of the experts on my podcast, like Christopher Monckton, my neighbor Mark Morano, and others. I feel like what they're doing is they're trying to get us to reduce our energy use, our ration our use, and we're going to get the intermittent solar and wind. While they're going to get the coal and the gasoline, they're going to need that for the AI data centers. So it's kind of like the real purpose of the climate change narrative is so they can divert the hydrocarbons for their use to run these systems. So just any further thought on that, or this obsession with AI that they have?
I don't know if the original carbon credit idea even contemplated AI, because I think that the energy usage in this whole thing is really only the last few years, and certainly carbon credits and the whole idea of creating an economic system based on carbon credits way predates AI. Now they're finding themselves in a pretty hypocritical situation, which is, well, we just created this false manufactured scarcity, but now we need to use all of this energy for this other application. And their justification of it will be, well, if we don't use AI to solve all of these problems, then we're basically going to be facing an existential threat. And that's the way they're probably going to write it off. But the whole point of AI is key to the whole surveillance state. It's key to being able to track and monitor the surveillance, the social credit systems and everything else. And so I think that's the true intent for why it's being built. And the thing is, most of these people I actually don't believe in free will. I mean, you look at Harari and some of these other people. I mean, they really want to remove free will from the equation, and they think that that AI is an evolution of humanity. So you're now starting to see this intersection of technocracy and transhumanism. And so I believe in some ways that they're playing God, and that they think that free will isn't really necessary or important moving forward.
And before getting to, I guess, one of the big topics, which of course is CBDCs, cryptocurrency, any thought on some of the other parts of this system, such as digital ID and digital passports? You know, we're seeing now the Europe, EU, UK on board these entry-exit systems. ETIAS, where you have to now fill out a social credit form, pay 10, 15 euros, fill out a social credit form, wait for approval to then be able to go to Europe. Whereas before you could just buy a ticket and go. And then, of course, in theory, they could, for thought crime, they could deny you this digital visa and you can't go to Europe anymore. So just thoughts on some of those other parts.
Well, the end state is one global government with one digital currency. So the whole, and I can go into great detail on how they're doing that with CBDCs, even technically what they're doing. They're basically creating, the US is creating their own CBDC, but they're putting them on what's called a regulated liability network, where they're basically going to digitize all of our other assets, not just money, but stocks, bonds, our homes. And then they're connecting these regulatory liability networks. So the US's is connected to Japan's, which is connected to Europe. What does that mean? At the end of that process, it's one global network where all assets are digitized and can be centrally controlled. And they're doing the same thing with digital IDs, because the whole purpose of all of this is to move to one global government. And so this is why putting these digital IDs is critical to pushing this global agenda. And that is really what we're fighting. And again, so much of the time, and with all the politics in the United States, people think it's America versus China or BRICS and all of this other stuff. And the funny thing is, while all that stuff is going on, all of those countries are working together on pandemic alliances and vaccine passports. And so it's just another, manufactured distraction, while more surveillance is put in place and we move one step closer to this global technocracy. So digital IDs play critically into that, because digital IDs and CBDCs are completely intertwined. You need to be able to track, financial transactions and have those financial transactions tied to your ID, and then have that tied to your social credit system and the tracking and monitoring of your behavior, which AI will be critical to managing that whole process.
Yeah, the EU is creating its asset registry, and I'm an EU citizen, Croatian. I'm here in Mexico. Like, if they ask me to fill that out, I'm like, screw you guys. Like, they want to put your gold, your bicycles, your clothes, everything in that asset registry. And there's people, that listen. That I've got one of my former guests. He lives on a farm in Thailand, and he thinks he's going to be okay. It's kind of like, well, what you just outlined, Mexico, every country is going to have this system. There will be no escape. And just BRICS real quick. For years, I've been calling out BRICS. I view BRICS merely as, many in the alt media, the multipolaristas, as I like to call them, who think Xi Jinping and Putin are going to save us. I view BRICS as actually a step towards this system, because the global south is not developed. What is Belt and Road doing in BRICS? It's developing the global south so that they can then be plugged into this system. Would you agree? Thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, it's just more consolidated. I mean, BRICS is like saying BRICS is important for moving freedom is like saying the EU is a big step towards freedom. It's kind of the same thing. It's all more consolidation. So let's consolidate regionally. And once you've consolidated regionally, or I guess BRICS isn't necessarily connected regionally, but then it's going to be easier to, it's that one more step closer to a complete global system.
And North American Union, I mean, you were talking about the technates. I believe I conducted the last living interview with the father of the North American Union, Robert Pastor. I used his textbook in my courses. He visited, I met him twice. He visited our campus. And December of 2013, I Skyped him into my classroom, and he passed of, I think, cancer in January 2014, and that's still up on my old channel linked to Geopolitics and Empire. But now we're seeing this push for integrating Canada, USA, Mexico, Greenland, Panama. As you said, that's the old 1930s technate. We can even go back further because Thomas Jefferson, I found letters where Thomas Jefferson called for a United States of Americas to integrate all of the Americas. And now the Trump crowd is egging on the North American Union.
Yep.
Just your thoughts on that, on all this?
I mean, it's crazy to look. Isn't it the Club of Rome that also had the globe divided up into 10 different regions? And if you look at what Trump is proposing with Greenland and everything, it's like this is like right out of the playbook. It's right out of central casting. And you can get to. A lot of people supported Trump thinking that he's anti-globalism, but if you're going to bring back Manifest Destiny, then you're really that's just another shade of globalism, is it not? So, I think it's absurd. And actually, I don't even know where that kind of came out of nowhere. He got elected, and then all of a sudden, after he's elected, I don't remember Greenland or Panama or Canada being part of any discussion during the presidential election at all. I mean, it's kind of a weird thing. And obviously, he had this in the back of his mind because he was ready to, on day one, start actually acting on it.
I'm sure someone behind the scenes informed him or briefed him on pushing this. And I've been, for the last 2 or 3 years, I've been specifically raising the alarm of how the Mexican president, I mean, we can go back decades, right, where Canadian, American, and Mexican officials have been pushing North American Union, NAFTA, Security Prosperity Agreement. Vicente Fox, the Mexican president, said we should have a North American Union. Calderon, the Bushes, you name it, right? The Canadian equivalents, was it the Harpers and the others? And Mexican President López Obrador, he was specifically saying in mainstream articles, interviews, we should copy the EU and integrate Canada, USA, and Mexico. He was also echoing Thomas Jefferson's. AMLO was saying we need to create a United States of the Americas. Then you have Bukele. Like, I know there's all these Bitcoin maxis, El Salvador, Bukele, rah, rah, rah. It's like, wait, in 2022, Bukele gave an interview where he said, like AMLO, we should copy the EU and create a Central American Union. It's like, wait a minute, why aren't the Bitcoin maxis talking about that? And the South American leaders like Rafael Correa, he gave an interview also 2 years ago saying we need to copy the EU and create a South American Union. And so I guess just any further thought on that?
Yeah, well, I'm clearly moving towards. I mean, I could talk about El Salvador for a long period of time, which, by the way, Bitcoin is no longer legal tender in El Salvador, and they took an IMF bailout. But I don't want to make this just about El Salvador. But it is clear that, but what's weird is that people seem to be cheering on this consolidation. People that were otherwise anti-globalism seem to be perfectly okay with more regional consolidation, and I don't quite understand that, but it's alarming.
My argument has been, so they've played with our emotions and greed and psyoped us. They've onboarded us onto certain psyops, which then paved the way for the second psyop. So the first was like the whole Bitcoin crypto stuff, where a lot of the Bitcoin bros through that bought into technocracy. And I've seen a higher level of Bitcoin maxis. Now they're on the Bitcoin maxi train. And now they're like, I've seen them post like North American Union is a great idea.
Yep.
So you can kind of see that, how they've been able to onboard them, no?
Oh yeah, they've absolutely been able to onboard them. I mean, who would have thought something that started out as peer-to-peer digital cash, separate from central banks and central authorities, and now you have these same Bitcoin maxis encouraging and lobbying for taxpayer money being used to create a Bitcoin strategic reserve. I mean, they've completely lost the plot. And so, we're seeing that embrace of technocracy everywhere. And almost this, what is it, neo-monarchy is also kind of another trend that you see from some of these.
Curvis Yarvin, they call it?
Yeah. But I mean, that's popular in some of the crypto circles. And in fact, when Sterling talks about these network states, I mean, I think in a way that the guy from Coinbase that wrote the book called Network State, I think he's really pushing that kind of a model as well. And so it's disappointing to see. There are still some OGs that are, wanting liberty and wanting voluntarism, people like Roger Ver, but they end up in prison and, and suppressed and censored. So it's very demoralizing actually to see with the Bitcoin maxi community.
You mentioned Roger Ver. I've considered giving up my U.S. citizenship, but then I'm like, well, what's the point? Look what happened to Roger Ver. He gave up his U.S. citizenship. He did everything by the book. And I could be living in Mexico or Croatia, and then I can have the government knocking at my door. Like it's crazy. What's going on then in the space of CBDCs, Bitcoin? I mean, it's just, for me, it's kind of like a word salad. Tether. You got stable coins, and so it seems to be there's different factions here. How would you sort of help us make sense of that?
So this has been difficult. So for me, I've been sounding the alarm on CBDCs for a couple of years, and I've been trying to educate people to stop using fiat currency is the best way. People have become complacent ever since Trump came out against CBDCs during the primary in New Hampshire. Actually, is when he came out against it. And so since then, people are just like, oh well, Trump says we're not going to have CBDCs, and so we can take that off the list and not have to worry about it anymore. And what's problematic, and I've written some articles on that, is we really already have a CBDC. So, and this is true in most countries. I mean, the way money is created is the governments issue IOUs to their central bank, and then the central bank creates the money in a database. In the United States, it's an Oracle database. Different countries' central banks use different technology, but that is by definition a central bank digital currency. Our money is already programmable, so people worry about the programmability that would come with CBDCs, but that's how health savings accounts work, flexible spending accounts. That Doconomy MasterCard I mentioned that tracks carbon credits, that uses the existing banking infrastructure. So you can program the existing digital money that we have. You can certainly track the existing digital money that we have, which is going on all of the time. And now in the US, the IRS is working with banks and using AI to analyze people's financial transactions. If you actually, this is one of the things AI is good for, is take all of the agreements that you sign and throw them into AI. It will be an eye-opening experience. With banks, you don't own, they can cancel your account without cause. They can change the fees without your consent. They can sell or share your information without your consent. And they can change the terms, like it's without your consent. So they can basically do whatever they want. So the money in your bank already doesn't belong to you contractually. And we've agreed to this. We've consented to this because whenever we set up these accounts, we sign these click wrap agreements and nobody reads these things. You couldn't read these. The average person signs between 150 and 400 of these click wrap agreements every year. And I actually did the analysis on this. You would have to spend an hour a day, 365 days a year, just reading these contracts. So of course nobody does it. And so we've given away our rights kind of across the board with the existing banking system. But anyway, this is how the existing system works. So practically speaking, what we already have is what people think they're afraid of, but somehow have bought into propaganda. They'll hear a politician say, well, we have to protect the financial privacy of Americans. Americans haven't had financial privacy since 1970 with the Bank Secrecy Act. And so it's all very clever propaganda. It can get much worse. It can get to what we were talking about, one global digital currency, tracked to social credit systems with AI surveillance, right? But what it is right now is what people mostly fear. And so now Trump comes out against CBDCs, but you still have 133 countries representing 83% of the global GDP actively pursuing CBDCs. And just because the federal government isn't pursuing a CBDC in the United States doesn't mean that the actual development has stopped. The US has been working on a CBDC since 2019. We've had 3 different projects. Those projects are not going to stop because of Trump's executive order. And now what Trump is pushing, and the entire Trump administration is pushing, are stablecoins. We've heard our new David Sachs, the US, I don't know why we have an AI and crypto czar. Like the czar thing became popular during the financial crisis. Okay. Actually, in 2008, I remember we had an auto czar, and I'm like, whoa, czar is not a thing that I associate with.
I went back and looked at the etymology. I mean, you have the Russian tsar, like that harks to empire or monarchy, or originally means, I believe, Caesar. Right? Yep. So it's an imperial term. It's a 100% an imperial term. And I only, the first time I heard about it in the United States was 2008. Then I thought it went away after that. And now we're like cheering on David Sachs from Silicon Valley is the AI and crypto czar. Well, he's saying stablecoins are going to be the next big thing. Okay, so what is a stablecoin? A stablecoin is a digital token that represents, fiat. So one token equals $1 or whatever the currency happens to be. And again, I'll say, the whole point of crypto was to not have centralized states and centralized banks. The fact that we're using this technology to create digital representations of fiat currency
that can be tracked and programmed is got to be one of the biggest self-owns for a technology community I've ever heard of, right? But they're pushing these. And I actually read the legislation. So Cynthia Lummis is this senator that the Bitcoin maxis love. She put the laser eyes in her profile. She drafted the Bitcoin strategic reserve legislation. Well, she's put together two pieces. She's tried to get legislation with Gillibrand from New York passed twice. The Lummis-Gillibrand crypto bill to try to bring rules to the road, which every time they say that, people don't actually want rules of the road. They want the government out of the way. Whenever they say rules of the road, that means that, they're reinforcing the status quo. But in any event, I read these bills, and the Lummis bill bans algorithmic stablecoins, which are heavily used in DeFi. And it basically puts the criteria such that Tether and, private stablecoins can no longer exist. The only financial institutions that can issue stablecoins are registered financial institutions with more than X amount of assets, right? So in other words, we're taking away even private stablecoins or algorithmic stablecoins, banning those and putting criteria such that only the JP Morgans of the world and the Wells Fargos in the world are going to be able to issue stablecoins. Well, what does this mean? Well, I will tell you, from the standpoint of surveillance and freedom and liberty, no one cares, and there's no difference whether it's issued by the Federal Reserve or JP Morgan. You're not going to have any more freedom just because it's JP Morgan versus the Federal Reserve. And so somehow we've gotten into this marketing propaganda angle where, well, we are pro-markets and we're pro-freedom because US banks are going to be able to issue multiple stablecoins. And this so misses the point. I mean, it's completely irrelevant in terms of, again, we get all of the negative features of it is a CBDC. It's just that, they're issued by multiple banks, but all of the tracking and everything is all the same. And then, of course, there's the other part, which is that who owns the central bank? The large bank. We don't know for sure, which is probably one of the other large scams in this. We have the Bank Secrecy Act. We have the Patriot Act. We have all of these things monitoring our financial transactions where we have to use biometric feedback and everything just to use a cryptocurrency exchange. And yet we don't even know what group of private entities owns the Federal Reserve that prints all of this money out of thin air. It's a pretty ridiculous and absurd situation, but this is the new narrative. The new narrative now is stablecoins, and that somehow stablecoins represent freedom and are somehow different than CBDCs, which they aren't technically or from a freedom perspective. And then we have Tether, which is another situation entirely, which is a stablecoin now that I think has a $140 billion market cap. And this is a project that I believe could turn out to be one of the biggest financial frauds in human history. This is an organization that has never been able to pass an audit. Never. So in other words, they have a coin that they create that they claim is backed one-to-one by dollars or treasuries, but they haven't been able to pass an audit. So they're basically Federal Reserve 2.0. They are creating digital fiat out of thin air, not even backed by real fiat, which is itself a Ponzi scheme that's manufactured out of thin air. So they've gone through this process, they've been kicked out of various banks, audit firms won't even work with them. And where they settled is, well, we can't get an audit, but we get an attestation. So they'll do a snapshot at any one day in time to show that they actually have the assets to back the coin. Well, there's this whole long, complicated, I'm doing a big article on this, but there's a company called iFinix that owns, as a majority owner of Tether, and they also own a cryptocurrency exchange called Bitfinex. So it turns out these organizations work together. So when Tether needed to pass an attestation, the crypto exchange Bitfinex wired a whole bunch of money. They passed the attestation, and then the next day they wired the money back to Bitfinex. So this whole thing has turned into a disaster, but it's one of those things where I think it was Getty who said, if you owe the bank $100, it's your problem. If you owe the bank $1 million, it's their problem. Well, now we're getting to the point where Tether owns something like $65 billion of US treasuries. And so this is going to be one of those things where when it collapses, it's probably going to get bailed out and covered up, particularly since the latest investor in Tether is a guy named Howard Lutnick, he invested $600 million into Tether, and his company manages the treasuries on behalf of Tether. So the $65 billion worth of treasuries is managed by Howard Lutnick's firm. Trump just appointed Lutnick to be his commerce secretary. And so, I mean, this is a train wreck in the making. And to make matters even more interesting, Tether just relocated to El Salvador. And so, this thing is turning into a disaster. But one other point I would make about this is, it's been argued, and I think the University of Texas did an analysis of this in 2017, that when there was the big bull run in Bitcoin in 2017, they found that over 70% of the increase in price of Bitcoin was directly linked to Tether. So in other words, imagine the situation where everybody's excited about Bitcoin. It's over $100,000 and it's a store of value because look at how much the price has gone up. But what if the reason the price has gone up is because this entity Tether has been printing tokens, fiat, essentially out of thin air, and then using that to pump the price of Bitcoin? And I think there's probably some truth to that.
A few questions here on this. One would be this talk of, again, this is not my space, but like a digital dollar, like a Bitcoin dollar where you talked about the strategic reserve. They've even talked about selling off their gold and Saylor demonetizing gold. And it's almost like a Bretton Woods 3.0 as I see it. We had a gold-backed dollar, then petrodollar, and now it's almost like the Bitcoin dollar where they'd be able to pay off their debt and sort of remake the American empire again and screw, the East and the BRICS world. Just thought on them, this talk of them sort of buying the Bitcoin and then somehow being able to pay off debt.
So fundamentally, it's based on the idea that it's a Ponzi scheme, and that other people are going to buy in, and that they're going to be able to dump on the rest of the world and use that to be able to clear off the debt. That is the premise of this. I actually like to take a step back and look at it this way. If Nancy Pelosi held a press conference and said, hey, I just put forward this bill, the United States taxpayers are going to buy $1 trillion of my stock portfolio and hold it for 20 years. That's essentially what Cynthia Loomis has done with the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. She owns $500 million worth of Bitcoin and then has put together a bill that says the taxpayers are going to buy, whatever it is, 1 million Bitcoin over a 5-year period of time, and then they're not going to sell them for 20 years. It's absurd. It's so crony that I actually can't even think of anything that's worse in terms of the size and scale of this. It's ridiculous that Liberty people should be documenting this. But yeah, the whole premise of this is that, well, everybody else is going to want to get involved with this, and then at some point we're going to be able to retire our debt this way. You might as well go to the casino and play the roulette wheel. It's ridiculous.
And the price. So this is one thing that I don't get. I know you talk about, you've got the Bitcoin that everyone's talking about now, and then you've got, I think, BSV, the other sort of forks. And with the Bitcoin that we're talking about, let's call it the globalist Bitcoin, the maxi Bitcoin, that's now 100,000 plus. It may have dropped, I think, today. I don't know. But Coinbase CEO came out the other day saying, it's going to hit the millions. It's going to hit, 1 million for a Bitcoin. And I'm just sitting here thinking, never, I'm a former history teacher, major professor, and I can't think of any time in history where there was any asset, one of something that was a million. And for me, it just smells of tulip mania. And what you're talking about with the whole, if it's true, 70% tether, artificially pumping up. So it's not an organic price level. So any thoughts on, Bitcoin, tulip mania? Michael Saylor was on the cover of Forbes. I think you may have shared it as well. You had all of those other, the Sam Bankman-Fried, what's that lady?
Elizabeth from Theranos.
Right, and so it's like we might be going into that territory. So thoughts on the price? I just can't see it being sustainable, the main Bitcoin price. I see it collapsing. And also this being possibly as a pretext, I've had in my mind, everything you just mentioned, Lutnick, Tether, what if this collapses and then the system's like, look at all this that happened, and they use that as a pretext to say we got to do it the right way, with the regulated CBDCs and all this stuff. So just thoughts on all of this.
Well, that's been one of my thoughts as well, because when you dig into the team behind Tether, the implosion of Tether is going to make Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX look like you're going to church. Like truly, the people behind it have had track records involved with, child trafficking rings and, Bitcoin Ponzi schemes and everything else. And so to your point, you're going to be able to look at this and say, hey, listen, we're going to just have to give this to the Federal Reserve or to JP Morgan because we can't allow this kind of scam to happen again. That is one outcome. And when the article that I'm writing, I'm kind of laying out a couple of different scenarios. The other scenario is, look at what happened with FTX. Politicians on both sides gave millions of dollars to FTX, and I don't think any of them lost re-election. In fact, interestingly, Tom Emmer, a Republican who is the majority whip, who even Thomas Massey, Thomas Massey had nominated him to be speaker when this whole thing came up. He took massive amounts of money from FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried and never returned it. There were never any consequences. No one ever investigated the money laundering allegations. Nobody looked at the fact that while Sam Bankman-Fried was running this financial fraud, at the same time he was meeting with the Federal Reserve, the SEC, and with Congress, because he was going to be the guy working to draft the legislation to regulate the industry. He was meeting with Congress just a week or two before FTX blew up. So I can see Tether. Tether is already buying this influence. They already have the Commerce Secretary. They just invested $775 million into Rumble, which, by the way, is another thing to do, right? You start buying the channels, start buying the media, and now all of a sudden you can control the propaganda and you can work on the censorship angle of this. So I could see another scenario where because of the political connections, they decide to bail it out. And instead of uncovering the full fraud and us finding out the whole story, it becomes it was too big to fail. We had to do it. Kind of like when they bailed out Silicon Valley Bank and those four banks in 2023. Similar situation. The people will never know exactly what happened. And then all of a sudden, maybe Tether is the CBDC, right? Or Tether becomes the JP Morgan stablecoin. I can see those as viable options as well. But again, this is one of those things where when financial frauds become so large, they end up becoming institutionalized government policy, which I think is an interesting observation, because you can buy the media, buy the politicians, and control the narrative.
Thought just roughly on the Bitcoin price. Any thought on that?
Well, look, the Bitcoin price could go up if states and federal governments are forcing taxpayers to buy it, then that obviously would stimulate demand. I think that that's ridiculous. I mean, obviously, and so it could go up for a while. I don't hold any of it because, my investing philosophy is we should invest in what we want to see in the world, right? I think I mentioned this yesterday. I know a lot of people that are like out protesting the vaccines and protesting the mandates, and then they've got 401ks that have Pfizer and Moderna in it. And so this is one of those things where, the price might go up, but is it a good thing if it goes up? Do you want to put your energy towards that? So I think it probably will go up. I mean, it in the near term. Like, I have why wouldn't it? If you're now forcing taxpayers to buy it, I think something would need to happen. And I'm glad we're talking about this. I've been working on this article about this for a couple of months, and I've been really doing a deep dive in Tether, and I'm looking at this and I'm kind of like, how is this not the biggest scandal? And I'm not the only one writing it. There's that Bitfinex. There are other people that have been covering Bitfinex on Twitter, and there are other people that have been talking about this. But the more I've dug into this, it's like, this is blatant. This is like the Big Short meets Bernie Madoff times 10. Like, this is like a clear train wreck waiting to happen. And I'm wondering, how do you take something that's so complicated and communicate it? How do you tell the story? If you could tell the Big Short before it happened, would anybody listen? And I don't know the answer. And I'm actually deeply trying to figure it out, because even as we're talking about this, it's so involved. There are all these relationships, all of these organizations, all these different companies involved, and you have to understand the technology and the history behind it and everything else. And so, but I think people should be warned about it, and people should be very skeptical about both Bitcoin and Tether and all of the ties to the Trump administration.
And I don't want to talk about this at all at length. You guys talked about it yesterday, but just real quick for listeners' sake, XRP, it's a globalist thing, but I've seen a lot of QAnon-like accounts, people in alt media pushing XRP, and I think it's because they want to get that ride up, and just I think that's the principal reason people in all media are excited about it, for just solely the greed aspect. But it's a totally controlled coin. Just quick thought on XRP.
It's funny about XRP because Roger Ver was the first investor in XRP. In fact, when it was just one guy, Jed McCaleb, I believe was his name, was the founder. It didn't have all of the Brad Garlinghouse and all the people that were currently involved, and then all the politicians that got involved. That wasn't it. Roger invested in it because the idea at the time was, well, what if you could have peer-to-peer digital cash without having the mining and the energy, consumption? And it turned into something completely different. I've been stunned. You mentioned QAnon. I've been stunned. Here's the other funny thing. So this guy who started XRP left XRP a long time ago, and he started Stellar Lumens. Well, there's similar propaganda going around about both of those. Both of those, there's this whole network of people saying that these are the coins that are going to usher in the new financial system. And I've seen big accounts on Twitter saying, yeah, we want the Great Reset, and like pushing the Bank of International Settlements, like trying to make these claims that, well, if your bank doesn't meet these new requirements, then, you should get out of this bank. And I've actually been curious as to who's funding that, because it's such a twisted and inaccurate narrative. But it is propaganda. It is all greed. It is all, well, it's one of two things. One, it's clearly greed, because there have been people that have been pushing this story. I remember the last crypto cycle, people were pushing this idea of XRP going to $589. Well, if you take the number of coins for XRP and multiply it by 589, that market cap would be greater than the value of all of the assets on the planet. So the idea of XRP hitting $589 makes no sense. It's not even possible. But this became a thing that was memed. And then people were really excited about it. And it almost became like a mantra for XRP. Well, obviously, it never went anywhere near that. It was below $1 for a long period of time. But there's the greed aspect. But then for me, it's, well, why are you even cheering on? So the reason you're excited about this coin is because you think it's going to be used to power CBDCs, or it's going to be used by all of the banks to transfer value back and forth. Why are you excited about this? Why is this the thing that you're rallying around? That would be facilitating the tyranny that I thought people that got into crypto were trying to avoid. And so this is why it's complicated for me on two levels. One, it's clearly hype, but then also it's hype for something that people probably shouldn't be interested in pursuing.
Cash. So you've heard Catherine Austin Fitz. I enjoy some of her work and analysis. Technically, I've met her at an airport, and I'm in the Independent Media Alliance with her. And she says to use cash, but I've come around to your perspective. For a while now, I tend to have more cash on hand. A little bit less in the bank, for reasons you previously mentioned, but that cash that I have on hand, I feel like it's fleeting. Like I said, I'm a citizen of Croatia. I was there, I think, last 2022, where we had our national currency, the Croatian kuna, and we took the euro. I was there, I think, by September 2022, and I think by December they said turn in all of your Croatian kuna, because they're going to be worthless after December 2022 or 23 or whatever. And I still have some on hand. They're worthless now. And I feel like if we go to this digital system, they could do the same thing with the Mexican peso or the US dollar, where that physical cash, they could just declare it null and void, and it's worthless. So I think your approach is more correct, because, and you said if we're using Mexican fiat peso, US fiat dollar, it's still the same system that you just described. Now, just your thoughts on how cash is not really a...
So if you're using cash, you're supporting central banks. You're supporting war. You're supporting all of the tyranny of central banks, because cash is still money that's backed by debt. So you are participating and engaging in the system. So first and foremost, that's one thing about cash. The other thing about cash is, you're right, they can exchange cash, and France used to do that a lot. I know this has happened a lot. There are a lot of countries that would routinely put expiration dates on the actual physical cash itself. You would have to turn it in for new bills. That was pre-Euro, obviously, but I think that...
even Mexico in the 90s, we got a new peso just 30 years ago.
Yeah. And so, but I mentioned this yesterday, ramping up the surveillance of physical cash. So there are projects to use nanotechnology, RFID, and other things so that you will be able to actually track physical cash. So the one thing that, I guess the only redeeming thing about cash is, again, it's still fiat. You're still funding wars. You're still funding the tyranny of the state, but at least your transactions are private. So that's the one advantage that it has. That advantage is going to go away. And you're already starting to see certain, retailers, I think this didn't turn out to be true. I think about Starbucks was going to not take it, but a lot of businesses are actually stopping taking cash and are moving to purely digital. And I think it's something like in the US, 92% of all transactions are digital cash anyway. So what it comes down to is there's this big movement. Yeah, use cash on Fridays and everything else. It's like, great. You paid for your haircut with cash. You got your manicure done with cash, but you're paid with direct deposit. You're paying your taxes, you're paying your mortgage, you're paying all of this other stuff. Like, it's not a real big victory that on the edges, you're still using a paper form of fiat currency for this real small sliver of transactions. That's not going to stop CBDCs.
No, and it's increasing. Like, I've been shocked when I went to the US in 2023 for a number of conferences, Ron Paul conferences, and it was my first time in DC. I was born in Chicago, so I never got to actually see the Capitol. So I took a day to just quickly walk around, see as much as I could of DC. And not even in the airport, just some coffee shop around the Capitol. I'm a coffee fiend, and it's like, no cash. It's like, I'm like, my jaw dropped. And, you see it first in like airports and places that are more centralized, but now just a coffee shop in the city, like, we're not taking cash, sorry. And then even in Mexico, you're slowly starting to see this more and more. I mentioned previously, I've always said COVID was the pretext to, and I'm record March of 2020 saying that COVID was the pretext to bring in specifically worldwide algocracy, ruled by algorithm. We had Joe Rogan with Mark Andreessen a few weeks ago pushing AI, rule by AI governance. And I'm like, 5 years ago, I'm like, that was the plan. And then here in Mexico, the banks during COVID tried to push people to activate something called CODI, in your bank app, any bank, to pay with your phone. Many people didn't take it up. And it's kind of like you're saying earlier, that they'll just come back with a new name, and now they call it DIMI, and they're trying to get people to activate to pay with their phone. And so in your talk, I'll link your talk where you go into a lot of the solutions, and bookmark your site. I'm going to be looking at the Cake Wallet stuff and all that, so you don't have to go in depth here, but just your thoughts then on solutions of what we can do as individuals as well as collectives.
Yeah, I'll get to that. I want to say one other thing, which is I just saw yesterday that the senior person at the Treasury resigned, and I guess Elon Musk got access to all of the Treasury, the computer system basically, and can see all of the transactions now, and which is a bad thing from a technocracy perspective. It is a good thing that it will provide us with short-term insight as to what's going on. And actually, I was just saying this to somebody the other day. It's kind of like, when Musk took over Twitter, I'm like, this is great for a short period of time. We will have free speech for a window. But he always said from the very beginning, this was going to be an everything app like WeChat, which is the basis of the social credit system. And so if we can take advantage of the good that he's doing for a short window and not turn over technocracy to him, then that's actually a good thing. But what we found is that the Treasury didn't reject any payment requests and was funding everything. I mean, not only NGOs, but funding terrorists. Basically, there was no control system whatsoever, and money was going everywhere. And so people say that crypto is used for all these illicit things. And literally, the Treasury directly was funding terrorism and nefarious actors and all kinds of things. And so I look forward to all of that. If that information could get out and go public, and you're starting to see the different organizations that were being funded by this, I think it'll be eye-opening for people. I think it'll even be breathtaking for me, who has been skeptical of government for forever. I think it'll even be like disgusting and mind-blowing for me to see how the money's actually been spent. So with that said, what I focus on is, first and foremost, if you want to stop technocracy, you have to stop the digital currency, because the digital currency is the control system for everything else. And the way to do that is to stop using fiat currency. And furthermore, the opposite of surveillance is privacy, right? Most of the big cryptocurrency projects are transparent. Bitcoin, Ethereum, even Tether and these stablecoins, they're untransparent ledgers, which means your transactions can be tracked. In the case of Tether, your transactions can be frozen. And it also means that the government can say, hey, this Bitcoin is on a blacklist, this Bitcoin is on a whitelist, which means that Bitcoin is no longer fungible, right? And what's a fundamental property of money is that $1 equals $1. That property goes away when you have these transparent blockchains. So I've moved completely into privacy coins. As you mentioned, I use Cake Wallet because it's the easiest to use. It has multiple cryptocurrencies in it. And from within the wallet, you can actually buy gift certificates to actually pay. So, when I came down to Mexico from Narratopia, I bought my airline ticket using an American Airlines gift card. I bought the hotel with a hotels.com gift card. And then when we were driving around, we used Uber, and I was using an Uber gift card. So it's actually pretty powerful. I mean, this isn't the end state. It's not direct peer-to-peer cash, but I'm using Monero, a privacy coin, to buy gift cards. And so that's a pretty cool way to, begin to move away from a bank account. And so that is all done within the Cake Wallet. There's another crypto I like called Zano, Z-A-N-O. It's a privacy coin developed. The guy who developed it actually developed the underlying technology behind Monero. And the idea behind Zano is not only is it a privacy coin, but it allows you to tokenize other assets and trade those assets. And I'll take a quick step back to say everything runs on databases currently. Money is on a database. Money is an Oracle database, but stocks run on a centralized database. And these centralized databases are hacked all of the time. I mean, I don't know how many times this year alone I've gotten noticed this, Microsoft hack. I think Social Security experienced a hack. It's a fundamental thing that goes on with centralized databases.
Many of these digital ID projects in foreign countries they're having. India, Italy just had millions of people's data hacked from digital ID.
Well, when El Salvador launched Bitcoin, they used a centralized custodial wallet called Chivo. It was hacked. So every citizen of El Salvador was doxxed. So anyway, but back to this. So everything runs on a centralized database, and there's something like $1 trillion of economic damage every year due to hacking and lack of integrity of these centralized databases. So tokens, where you're representing assets or transactions digitally on an immutable ledger, that is an improvement from centralized systems, right? Because it gets rid of the ability to be hacked. It gets rid of the ability to reverse transactions and go back in time and change what happened because you have this immutable record. However, blockchains can be used for good or evil, just like AI could be used for good or evil. And the same people that are working on CBDCs are working on, as I mentioned earlier, digitizing all of our assets, but in a way where the tokens will be programmable, trackable, and censorable. Zano allows you to create what are called privacy tokens, where I can tokenize my own assets. I could create a company and I could tokenize my shares, and those tokens are private. So now my shares are private, and the government or a competitor or a hostile entity can't come in and actually see my individual transaction information. And so 5% of the world's assets are money. The other 95% are, stocks, bonds, real estate, everything else. So Zano will allow people to privately tokenize and trade assets. And that, I know it's a little bit abstract. I'll give like a couple of examples of what you can do with it. I'm actually working on creating a gold-backed privacy stablecoin. So this is a cryptocurrency on Zano. So imagine it has the privacy features of Monero, but it's actually backed by gold and you can redeem it for physical gold, but the gold is separated completely from the state. So basically working with a network of decentralized vaults in different countries where now we've separated money from state, but you can actually spend it privately. That's one application. Another application is this thing called confidential layer, which actually allows you to bridge your Bitcoin or Ethereum or Bitcoin Cash into Zano through this permissionless system. So now you can actually take your transparent blockchain and make it private. So you'll be able to actually spend Bitcoin privately with low transaction fees because you're actually spending it through Zano. So that's why I'm excited about it, because again, to me, my whole focus has been stopping technocracy, and the core of that is stopping CBDCs, and the best way to do that is through these privacy coin solutions.
Exiting fiat. I used to have a gold money account, and they had given me once. It was a MasterCard debit where supposedly, you pick a boat. It was I thought it was allocated gold in the vault somewhere in Switzerland, or you pick the vault, and you would use the debit, and it would discount gold from that account. But they ended all that because I think maybe they were too early. They couldn't handle all the KYC regulations. I had to close my account with them because they kept freezing my account over and over and asking for an ungodly amount of KYC data. So maybe you guys will have more luck.
Well, there's so a lot of this, because a lot of these things have been tried before and they didn't work for a variety of reasons. There were versions of this that were tried before Bitcoin, but now we have a completely different situation where there's issuing the tokens, which is one thing. So we'll be selling the tokens probably through large exchanges or through large wallets, which have already done the KYC process. But then you're spending it as it's a privacy token. So literally nobody can stop you using it. There is KYC if you go to redeem for physical gold. There's no way around that. And so, but the whole point of this isn't we're doing something bad. This isn't about money laundering. This is about actually targeted for individuals and small businesses who have basically had their lives destroyed by the devaluation of fiat currency. It's actually trying to give merchants a chance, because as I've been doing these workshops across the country, merchants have said to me, well, I'd like to take something other than the dollar, but crypto's way too volatile. So if you could take the store of value properties of gold and combine it with the privacy features, and the ability to create this kind of privacy coin didn't exist before Zano, because there was no way to create privacy tokens. And so this whole thing just kind of came about. If you had asked me a year ago, I would have never thought I would even be working on this. It came out based on talking to merchants and doing these workshops and realizing what the actual problem is.
And what you're doing, what you outlined, it's on your website again. People can go there to figure all this stuff out. The Kick wallet, you're next level, what you're doing outside of the system. My worry is, I'm going to try to move in that direction, but what happens if that's only for a time, like where they start outlawing the private cryptos, or they bring in the digital ID where they control your access to the internet itself? Like, is it precarious, the system you're currently using? What you explained with the Kick wallet and all that. Is there a possibility where that can no longer be possible? Or you think you'll be able to do that for quite a while?
This whole thing is an ongoing, it's a war. It's an ongoing war, and it's ongoing even in the privacy space. The government's trying to track Monero. So Monero's working on upgrading their algorithms, and so it's a battle. We have to go all in now, though, because the more time elapses, the lower our probabilities. Because every time there's a new COVID or some kind of major manufactured problem, we get more surveillance. Every time. COVID implemented a ton of surveillance, even contact tracing. People don't even think about how significant that is. Now everybody's phones, do you think they took away the contact tracing? They did not take away the contact tracing. So now they can monitor everybody's individual movements. In addition to, they ramped up even the financial surveillance under COVID, which is interesting. And Maxine Waters was even trying to put in using a digital dollar for UBI, originally under the COVID bill. And so we know that whatever the next catastrophe is going to be, I can see Trump backing a digital ID on the basis of illegal immigration, and I can see MAGA cheering it on. I worry about Elon Musk. We already know to get your blue check mark, you've got to give your information to a company tied to Israeli intelligence. He's launching X payments with Visa. Visa is a WEF partner company. So you're going to have complete tracking of that. And clearly it's a social, based on the way this whole freedom, not freedom of speech, but freedom of reach. Well, that algorithm is a social credit score. And with this whole debate over the H-1B visa situation, it's very clear that he is willing to change the algorithm and kick people off of the platform if they don't agree with his particular views. It is not a free speech platform. I could see, actually, just as a joke, I used AI to draft what an executive order would look like.
I think I saw you posted that, no?
Yeah, so if Trump were to say, hey, here's the U.S. Patriot Shield Act, and it was basically saying everybody has to use Elon Musk's Everything app. And I wrote it, and if you read it, it's kind of like, I was kind of a little nauseous after reading it, because I'm like, I could actually see this happening, and then I could actually see people cheering it on. Like, we're at a weird point right now where we went from people were waking up and like, yeah, we don't like the World Health Organization, we hate Klaus Schwab, to all of a sudden, yeah, but we'll hand the keys to Elon Musk as long as it's done under Donald Trump. What was the original? I know I got way off on this. What was the original question? I think I.
No, I think you covered it. No, you covered it. Just like with the way how you're next level, you've exited fiat and you're doing Cake Wallet, and that could be curious.
We have to do it now. And look, the thing that's alarming. So when I started doing this, it was to sound the alarm, right? I'm like, okay, CBDCs are coming. I didn't realize, like when I started I took like 5 years off from activism, and I was like focusing on like going to meditation retreats and doing all kinds of other stuff completely. And I was happy to do it. I was happy to, I don't like doing that. I'm like a situational extrovert. I would prefer to not be traveling all over the place. And then my friends in New Hampshire that were in the Liberty crypto space were being targeted by the federal government. So I'm like, well, why is this happening? And that's when I did the deep dive on CBDCs. I'm like, wow, they went from 35 countries researching this to 134 countries representing 98% of the GDP. And then Biden's executive order was explore CBDC and then crack down on crypto. So this is why all of my friends. So after I wrote my book, I went on Ian Freeman's show, and then Ian Freeman, part of the Free State Project, we went to a sentencing hearing. He was sentenced to federal prison for 8 years. Then 7 months later, Roger Ver, who I had interviewed on my show, was arrested, thrown into the same prison as John McAfee, and now he's facing 109 years. And so, is there risk? Yeah. I mean, I have most of my T-shirts now have my friends on them that are in prison. That part of this is for doing things that weren't even illegal. So there's obviously risk, but the thing is, if we don't stop it now, if we don't start moving to these alternatives now, we're going to have no shot at it at all. But with just minimal participation, 1 or 2%, it's going to throw their whole thing off because they require complete compliance. The reason Biden passed that executive order and targeted people like Roger and Ian is because they were effective at promoting the use of digital cash as an alternative to fiat currency. And you have to shut down the competition because once people see what a CBDC really is, nobody's going to want it. But they'll take it under fearful circumstances by default if there are no other options available. So they've been trying to clear all of the other options. Fortunately, we do have a bit of a reprieve here, and now we do have a little bit of a window. The Trump thing is kind of a mixed bag in the sense that it does buy us more time, but on the other hand, I think people are now more complacent, and so people are not actually doing the things that more people were taking action on the CBDC stuff 9 months ago than they are today.
I guess my last question, I couldn't get it in the question session the other day, but taxes and crypto. You know, you mentioned merchants, for example. I've been, as a U.S. citizen, you know, as a Mexican citizen, I don't care because as far as I understand here in Mexico, you can like buy and sell crypto. There's no really laws for it. Like nobody cares. As a Croatian citizen, I'm not afraid of Brussels, but you know, the empire, Washington, they can, you know, I still like to do things by the book with the IRS. You know, when I started receiving crypto donations, I hired a tax accountants that can quantify all that, you know, to manage it. I'm just reticent to be using it as I otherwise freely would, especially like Monero stuff, because, you know, I've already been targeted by DHS and NATO. So at any moment they can be like, let's, you know, mess with this guy. And so, you know, whether it's merchants accepting Monero and stuff like that, how would they then handle, or is there software for handling like the taxes?
Well, there's software for handling the taxes, but this is one of the things that I found. This is why I came up with the gold-backed stablecoin, because I was talking to merchants, and the merchants want to be able to take multiple cryptos, but let's face it, most cryptos, I mean, Bitcoin has most of the market share, but you can't use Bitcoin for day-to-day transactions because it's too slow and expensive, which means there are a bunch of altcoins you can use. But realistically, if I'm going to talk to a merchant in anywhere, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, or whatever, how many people within a 25-mile radius even have Monero, right? So they want to be able to take multiple cryptocurrencies, but they don't want to manage multiple wallets and they don't want to hold crypto. So what I've been recommending is this payment solution called Now Payments, where basically you integrate, you can set up and take, you know, a couple hundred different currencies, but you only get paid in one currency. And you pick what that default currency is. And so inevitably, these merchants, I'll give you an example. I signed up this merchant, CannaSense, which sells cannabis and other things legally through this really interesting structure. You know, they ultimately wanted to have everything resolved to a stable coin. So from a tax perspective, it's not difficult for them because they're not actually holding multiple cryptocurrencies.
So like they'll sell in whatever cryptocurrency and in that moment get converted to the stablecoin, and they just have to.
Yeah, they only actually get the stablecoin. So from their perspective, it's the same as if they were actually taking the dollar. So they're not having a big tax consequence with that. But at the same time, now it's interesting with the gold-backed stablecoin. Gold and silver are technically legal tender, and then states are working on state-based legal tender laws. And so this may be a way, and there will be complexity involved in the software to kind of figure this out, but you won't have the capital gains implications using a gold-backed stablecoin that you would have using a cryptocurrency, which you then have to actually deal with capital gains issues. And so that's essentially the answer for this. And for me, living on crypto, it's kind of interesting. I don't just live on crypto. I also have gold and silver, because I kind of treat gold and silver as the store of value. But there have been years where I'm living on crypto, and crypto is in a down market where it's like I don't have any capital gains. And unfortunately, they have these stupid rules where you can only take the $3,000 worth of loss in a year, and you can't really carry it forward. So it's like, well, okay, this year I actually didn't have to pay any taxes, and it's unfortunate. And then the next year, it is what it is. But people make a lot more out of this tax issue. It's not like it's that difficult to use computers to figure out, I bought this coin for this much, I used it or sold it for this much, and then here's the formula you apply to it. Unless you're doing a lot of transactions. Often I've used debit cards, crypto debit cards is kind of like the fallback. So you can buy gift certificates or you can pay directly, but then often you end up using like a crypto debit card. Well, what I'll do is I'll just sell crypto for a month or two of expenses. Well, so this isn't really hard to calculate the tax implications of this, right? If you're only doing that 6 times a year, it's actually pretty easy to figure out what the tax implications are.
There's been talk, you think, the Trump administration, I think they talked, was Eric Trump talking about doing away with some of the tax applications for crypto use? Yeah,
he actually said, I have no idea how they're going to do this. And by the way, I'm not advocating for this, but it is weird. So they're saying crypto projects made in America will have 0% tax. And I can admit, I'm looking, because when I was creating this gold-backed token, I was probably going to do like the foundation to manage the gold in Switzerland and then some other country to actually issue the token. And now I'm like, all right, well, I'd like to see what this has to say. That would be huge. That would actually be a huge catalyst for the industry. I don't know what it means. Is Bitcoin made in America? Like, how do you even figure out what made in America is? Is it made in America if you mined the Bitcoin in America, but not made in America if you mined it in China? Like, I will be very curious to see what they're proposing for language for what it means to be a crypto project in America. But that would be a game changer, because that capital gains tax thing is a barrier for a lot of people.
Bitcoin was made in America at the NSA headquarters. I just joke. I just started a whole.
Look, I don't know the answer. People ask me that all the time. Who do you think Satoshi? I don't know if it was the NSA or if it was somebody that actually had positive intentions or not. Towards the end, Satoshi was actually talking in the discussion boards about the importance of privacy. I thought for a while that maybe Satoshi was the same guy that was behind Monero and that left Bitcoin to actually start Monero, realizing that the lack of privacy by default in Bitcoin was a strategic problem. Or it could be the NSA, who knows?
Yeah, Richard Werner, he thinks it was the CIA or whatever. I had on Dr. Jack Kruse recently, and his story was that it developed as part of this Jewish mafia in the 80s. So there's different theories.
Wow, I haven't heard that one
out there. Yeah, I think it was Mayor Lenski or something, and some software that led to some cypherpunks develop. I don't know. I have to go back and listen to that. So we've covered a lot, massive amount. Again, I've got your book actually here with me on my Kindle, the final countdown. So I recommend people get your book, follow you on X. Again, you're like my top 5 experts on the algorithm ghetto. Patrick Wood of Technocracy, Aaron Day, and a couple others. And so, where best places to find you?
Best place to find me, daylightfreedom.org, and then on X at Aaron R. Day. I'm always on X. Unfortunately, still, we need to transfer to decentralized solutions. The book is still relevant, except for you want to go to the website. I have a place in the menu called Exit Fiat, because it's constantly changing. Living on these alternative assets changes all the time, and so you publish a book and it's like, I'm not going to republish the book every week. So I keep the most recent list of things that I'm doing on daylightfreedom.org in the Exit Fiat section. So I encourage you to take a look at that for the most up to date, because the book is out of date horribly.
Yeah, and I'm there right now, and I interviewed a couple months back the I guess the CEO, the head of the Goldbacks as well. So he's been on the podcast. I got a couple of the Goldbacks as well. So anyways, keep up the great work. Aaron, thank you for coming on Geopolitics Empire.
Thank you for having me.